So, kid, I hear you want to make it on YouTube. Let's talk about the reality of that. Why? Why did I decide to do that voice? I don't know. Part of me's tempted to keep it going for the entire video. I'm not going to do that, though. I can already feel the scratching at the back of my throat doing that voice. I'm not going to keep doing that. You want to hear that voice? I don't know. Hire me as a voice actor and pay me to mess up my throat. So, anyways, yeah, I have been meaning to do this video for a while because I feel like a lot of YouTubers will talk in generalities about the financial reality, usually when they need some extra help, they need a boost to their Patreon, their subscriber numbers, maybe even a GoFundMe or what have you. And I really feel that the audience doesn't know what it's like to actually try and make a living on here. And initially, I was just going to talk about my experience, but then I realized, sort of getting my thoughts down, I'm like, a lot of this, I'm speculating about what it's like for other YouTubers as well. You know, I could just ask some others and get their actual opinions and answers to these questions that I know what it's like for me, but I don't know what it's like for them. Why don't I ask? So you're going to see a number of other folks on here. Actually, how about I let them introduce themselves now?
Hi, I'm Jesse Earl, aka Jesse Gender. I'm a video essayist and filmmaker, best known for my video essays as Jesse Gender, where I talk about, the nuance and the nerdy political and social issues through geekdoms and fandoms, as well as talking about trans and LGBTQ issues generally.
Hi, I'm Pillar of Garbage, or well, I don't know if I am Pillar of Garbage. I'm the person that does the Pillar of Garbage. Maybe I am Pillar of Garbage. I don't know. Let's just say I'm Pillar of Garbage. I've been doing YouTube for like, I don't know, 2 and a bit years now, I think.
Hi, I'm Scott Nicewander. I have a YouTube channel called NerdSync, NERDSYNC, and I look at comic books and superheroes and cartoons and just nerdy media in general, and I try to use them to explore real world history, sometimes philosophy, culture, and art. Really just a lot of history these days.
My channel is called JXE, which is also my little name.
Yeah, my name is Marlena. My channel name is Avello. It used to be Dream Sounds, which is what I'm most known for, and I make video essays.
My channel is called Channel Pup. I talk about fandom content, mainly pertaining to things like sort of comic books and the occasional video game thing.
I do video essays, kind of like quick fire pop culture analysis, talking about films, TV, and like the discourse surrounding them and other stuff. Basically just whatever, if I get a cool idea, generally about media, I make a video.
I used to be known for making them about Disney, but now I'm doing, not stopping that, but just also expanding beyond that.
And I make media video essays generally, but sometimes other things.
I started doing comic books and superhero stuff specifically, and I'm branching out into doing a lot of cartoon-related stuff, specifically around Scooby-Doo, because no one has stopped me yet.
Yeah, I kind of try and pride myself on a bit of a level-headed perspective, I guess. That's kind of more kind of my kind of thing, my approach.
Along with a totally unrelated podcast that I do called It's Probably Not Aliens with my friend Tristan Johnson, where we debunk ancient astronaut theory and the TV show Ancient Aliens every week, and that's been fun too.
Also, I'm a friend of Vero, so that you have to put that in the knock against me category.
And of course, there's me. My name is Vera. I run Council of Geeks, the channel what you are watching right now. And yes, this is, in fact, my full-time job. So, yeah, we're going to be jumping back to those folks with their answers to some of the things that I'm going to be addressing as well, and sort of the questions that I thought made the most sense to talk about. Now, what neither I nor any of the other people who I talked to, because I didn't ask them, are going to provide you are specific dollar amounts. I will talk in generalities quite happily. And there's a lot that I can give you, broadly speaking. The first being that while I do consider YouTube to be my full-time job, there is no single revenue stream that I have which covers all my bills. I need all of them. But revenue streams is for a little bit down the line. Well, I already mentioned that I do consider this to be my full-time job. As for the other folks,
I do consider YouTube to be my primary and also full-time job. It's where I make most of my money, at least in terms of what I do, is directly stemming from my YouTube work.
Yes.
It very much is. And it has been for about 10 years now, is how long it's been my full-time job. I've been doing YouTube for like maybe 1 or 2 years before then.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the only thing that's produced me any meaningful money my entire life.
At a point, it was my full-time job, or I would describe it as such, but not at the moment.
Yes and no, as in like it's the primary one, I would say. Like it's the main one. But I Lord knows I would not want it to be the only one, if that makes any sense.
I have been doing this as my full-time job since I was laid off in mid-2020. Now, admittedly, I had a lot of help because at that point in time, I announced that I'd been laid off from my job, and my Patreon got a massive boost of several hundred people who hadn't been supporting me on there before. And without that, I couldn't have pulled this off. Actually, honestly, another thing I couldn't have pulled it off without was unemployment. Because despite the fact that I had an income from YouTube and Patreon, what that was amounting to, at least initially, was not enough to be considered an actual full-time job in terms of what I was pulling in. So I did still qualify for a certain amount of unemployment payments while the pandemic was going on because of the way things were working at that point. The amount I got varied, partially because the amount I was making every month also varied. I had to keep reporting my income. But between that and the boost, I got myself in a position where this has been my full-time job for almost 4 years now. And it's wild doing this. And it's hard. I'm not going to lie. Financially, it is hard. To give you just a general picture of where I'm at in terms of my finances, I am honestly probably one of the smaller YouTube channels that you will find who has managed to make this their full-time job. By and large, you tend to see it a bit more with ones bigger than me because, honestly, we don't make what you think we make. Like, we just don't. And also, like, I'm going to admit up front that part of why I'm able to get away with this, I say get away with this like I'm doing something wrong, but part of how I'm able to pull this off is a certain amount of privilege that these are questions that I didn't ask the other folks, but I'm going to own up to them up front before we get to any of the other stuff. There are advantages that I had going into this that most people my age don't have, regardless of whether or not they are YouTubers. First one, I did not have student debt. I had a trust fund that covered my college expenses. I actually never had student debt. I also didn't end up with a college degree for reasons that I don't feel like getting into, but I never had student debt. A couple years into doing this, I was able to pay my car off. So my car, which is only 5 years old, has been paid off for about 1.5 years now. So between that and some other stuff, broadly speaking, I don't have nearly the level of debt that is typical of a millennial. So I've got that going for me, and like, I don't want to discount that. So before we get into all the other stuff and the things that I asked everybody and what I got everybody's feedback on, I want to be upfront about that because that's stuff that I'm pretty sure I just need to acknowledge my privilege on. And I want people to know that, because what I don't ever want to do is like come off as that friggin' hustle culture business guru nonsense of like, well, it was hard, but I got there and you could too. Like, maybe you can, maybe you can't. I don't know. But I came into this with a lead. Just frankly, I did. But anyways, I asked everybody if they began putting up YouTube videos with the intent of eventually doing this as their job.
I did start uploading to YouTube wanting it to be my full-time job.
Not initially. Not to begin with. That's not why I started. But I got some nice success early on, kind of randomly, and then for the next kind of period of time, it was kind of like that was a possibility that I was exploring. It was like, I guess a year, maybe a year and a half in, that I was able to sort of kind of go for it, I guess. Until that point, it was always just, oh yeah, that would be cool one day.
100%. Before I started doing nerdy stuff, I really wanted to be a filmmaker, and specifically a visual effects person. I love the visual effects world, and I was so entranced by other YouTubers, like people like Video Copilot, Film Riot, Indie Mogul was huge, and I was just watching them, and I was just like, I want to do this. Like, I want to still pursue my career, but I'm like, but I want to do this. I want to do this YouTube stuff. I feel like I'm learning so much, and I feel like I could just try it. So I was definitely like, I want to do this to try and make this my job.
It was an ambition, but I didn't consider it to be a realistic one.
It came later. When I started, I was just doing one video a month, and it was literally just, I would take one day to write a script, one day to make the video, and I would just do that once a month. And then after like a year, it started blowing up, or like, I don't know, blowing up for YouTube standards. Like, the algorithm caught on to one of my videos, and then I started producing more regularly. And I didn't go full time until like a year and a half after that, or like 2 years after that.
Kind of, in that, like, when I kind of started out, like, it was just to post like little student short films and stuff. But then when it came to like considering it as a job, I kind of ramped up production a little bit to like daily uploads, and kind of properly thought through what I wanted to do as a YouTuber, in hopes that I wouldn't have to work for the kind of jobs that I was dealing with at the time. So it was kind of like a goal that I had in mind, but it was never necessarily the sole purpose of what I was doing in terms of video creation. I was ultimately doing it because it seemed like a fun idea, but there was that sort of school of thought of like, hey, yeah, I would definitely like to make this into like a job if possible, you know, like that would be something worth investing in.
For myself, the answer to that was, I think it kind of epitomized the standard clash that I have in my head, which is I have my creative ambitions, but I also have a very grounded pragmatism, which says like, yeah, but that's not going to happen. So like, there was part of me that had the dream of doing this in some form as my living. I didn't initially picture it as it now is, because if you go way back in this channel, it started as scripted shorts of all things, which were fun, but they were not of a quality that was ever going to become my living. I started this channel as a way to vent some creative energies that I had and get some stuff sort of off my mind, so that I knew I had done that and I could do something else. And while there was this vague dream of like, that would be nice, I didn't really allow myself the idea that I could, I'd say, until about 7 years into doing it. And even then I wasn't like, ooh, I could start doing this as my living. That was the point where I think, I bet you one day, if I'm good, I could get this to be my living. So initially when I started, no, it was mostly an outlet, even though I did have the wild dream. But I think that's also something that kind of worked in my favor, but also against me. In my favor, insofar as it kept me grounded and kept me from, jumping off a cliff without a parachute. But it also meant that I didn't really have a plan for how to build an actual sustained income platform, because I just kind of assumed, well, that's not really going to happen. So I didn't really look into how to do that for a while. So for me, it was a well-performing 2018 that initially planted the seed that maybe I could do this. I asked the other creators at what point did they think maybe I can pull this off?
I think the particular moment where I kind of started pushing for it was it started a little bit before the pandemic, but it really started in earnest during the pandemic when I was furloughed from my job and my Patreon was actually like decently still building at the time. And I was making a decent amount of money from YouTube AdSense and all that other stuff. So it wasn't enough to go full time right then. But the building of my YouTube channel, as I had more time during the pandemic, when I had more time, I saw it building and building more. That's basically right around the same time that I decided to go full time. And then it wasn't until like a couple of years later that I decided to actually go full time.
I started my channel, and then pretty soon afterwards, I think it was like my second video, did really well for a second video. And that gave me the impetus to carry on doing YouTube, not as a job then, just to see it as something other than some, a rainy day project I just tried out one day. And then after a kind of like a year and a half of just doing it as a thing, I was then kind of evaluating my options, kind of like, financially, career-wise. And then at that point, I got some more nice success, and that's what made me kind of take the leap at that point.
In 2014, I released a video about why is Peter Quill called Star-Lord? Why is that his name? And that was right before or right around the time of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And that was my first video to ever go like, not necessarily like viral. I think it has maybe over 1 million views, but that is one of the very few videos that I've done that has over 1 million views. It was definitely the first one that launched my channel. It was the first one that actually made me money, like consistently. And from that point, it really launched what I did and sort of took off from there.
Around the time I started looking for a salaried job to put myself through uni, I was getting a lot of rejections, and then my paycheck came in, and it was just more than what my monthly rent for student accommodation was going to be. And I thought, if I put more time and attention into this, maybe I could put myself through uni with the YouTube money. And eventually, I dropped out of uni and just focused on the YouTube.
That was a goal that came later, and it came solely just because I was making more money doing YouTube than I was my other gigs. So, yeah. But at the beginning, no. That was like 1.5 years before I started making, like, for me, a lot of money.
Yeah, definitely. So when I first kind of when I first got monetized on YouTube, I was kind of expecting it to be, okay, so maybe you get like a couple of pennies out of, sort of this. Like, I didn't quite anticipate getting like as much money as we YouTubers actually do, which in the long run, obviously it's not much money that we actually do make through ad revenue, but it was more than I was anticipating. And I was like, okay, if I can upload like every day, I could turn this into like a proper little full-time job. This could be possible. And back then, I didn't quite realize just how much kind of has to go into that, how much time you have to sink into that in order to actually make it pay out a full-time wage. But I was willing to give it a shot, and I thought this is possible. Since then, I'm a little more sensible than that, but yeah.
Now, for me, while I had the general idea, like around 2018 or so, that like, ooh, maybe I could pull it out, because that was a big growth year for me, certainly more than I'd had up to that point. But I didn't really think maybe I can make this work until I was laid off and I made that announcement and I had the big bump to the Patreon. It wasn't until then that I thought I think I can pull this off. Maybe just barely. And like, it is just barely, but we'll get into that a little later. But one of the big questions for YouTubers, especially if this is their living, is how much attention you pay to the algorithm. How much are you trying to play nice with it? How much does it weigh on your mind?
I guess the best way to put it is I worry about the algorithm constantly and think I'm trying to please it, but also my hyperfixations and the things that I end up writing about and the length of which I write about things ultimately isn't always algorithm friendly. So I guess mentally I think about it almost all the time when it comes to a video. In practical terms, I probably don't do as much chasing of it as I probably should for my own health and growth as a creator, both financially and just publicly.
Not as much as I should, I don't think. I'm always looking at the analytics. I'm always trying to learn lessons. Let's say consciously, at least. The main part at which I'm thinking about analytics and the algorithm comes when I'm trying to like brand the video, do like the thumbnail and the title and stuff. Other than that, I try to, maybe I'll be more likely to do this video idea sooner if it's kind of trending. But other than that, that's more or less it.
Oh, rarely these days. There was a dark period around maybe like 2016, 2017 that I sort of call my like the dark age of my channel, where I was definitely trying to do that, very clickbaity titles and thumbnails, because I was just like monetarily suffering, and I was like, I just gotta get people to click. Nowadays, I don't game the algorithm in terms of topics necessarily. I just try to put a lot more effort into thumbnails and trying to come up with an interesting title, but I'm not still good at it. I just sort of make videos about what I'm interested in, and I really hope they find the right audience. I hope the algorithm guides it to the people who want to see it.
Very little. I've not uploaded in like a year, so it is more so, I mean, I feel that I'm quite lucky in that I don't have particularly expensive tastes, and I make more than I generally spend most of the time. So I tend to just sort of do what I feel like doing, because my real ambitions in life at the moment aren't really centered around accumulating more money. I'm comfortable with the amount of money that I have, so I tend to just make what I want to make more than anything else.
Unfortunately, a little more than I probably should, because I often find that it's when I don't try too hard to appease the algorithm that I actually get better results. So, yeah, it's one of those things where sometimes when I'm trying to make something that's kind of, I consider algorithm friendly, like maybe it's like a trailer response or something. I'm talking about like something that's a little bit current. I can get kind of the kind of results that have me saying like, what does YouTube actually want? Like I'm like, what do you want from me? Because I'm not getting as many views on that kind of thing. I've personally found I've had better results from making content that's a bit more less focused on the algorithm, more focused on kind of trying to make something that people can revisit. Something that will tap into a very specific curiosity about a very specific subject that will, be something that people can revisit and watch more than the once, I guess. That's when I've gotten the better results. But I have geared up my content in the past towards being very algorithmically friendly, trying to, capitalize on what's new, what's current, and what's kind of a little bit more trendy, I guess. And sometimes it can be okay for, if the channel's in a rut, it can be good to just kind of do that to quickly force it out of it. But I don't recommend thinking with the algorithm in mind for the long term, if that makes any sense.
Now, if there's one thing that like I'm pretty sure I don't do as well as I could be doing, and I've mentioned this offhandedly more than a few times, I don't follow the algorithm nearly as much as a lot of people do, especially a lot of the much bigger channels. You'll hear them talk about the lengths that they go to please the algorithm. I do to a certain degree, insofar as I do know what the algorithm likes from me, and I do know what circumstances will make the algorithm treat me well. When there are actually new airing episodes of Doctor Who, it likes my Doctor Who content. Doesn't like my Doctor Who content when there is not new episodes of Doctor Who airing all that much, but it does like it then. It likes when I talk about, frankly, YouTube drama stuff, which I'm that's sort of knowing that YouTube likes when I talk about that. Like my highest performing video, the only one to break 200,000, is the first video that I did on James Somerton. Other things that have done very, very well for me in that area, videos that I did on Channel Awesome, on Illuminati. The recent one on Watcher was not quite as well performing as that, but I also didn't jump on that topic as quick as I had with some of the others. But I know YouTube likes when I talk about that stuff. But I don't want that to be my main thing. But I also know that it treats me very well. If I was a complete analog algorithm focused person, I'd be doing that the most. But I don't want to. I would say probably the thing about the algorithm that impacts me the most is it tells me when to either bail on something or when to move it. I used to do a lot more review material in general on this channel. Eventually, pretty much all of it except new episodes of Doctor Who. Well, I guess also technically the Take Two Doctor Who reviews and the Overdue Doctor Who reviews, but those have been done for a while. All the other review material moved over to my secondary channel, the Break Room of Geeks. I mean, the very reason I created the Break Room of Geeks was to avoid harming this channel by uploading stuff that I knew wouldn't perform well. Because when I would watch something or play a video game or like see a show that like isn't necessarily hot and trending, I would still want to talk about it. But if I just put something up here, the algorithm didn't like me doing that. And those things generally wouldn't perform well. And when you start regularly uploading stuff that underperforms, you get deprioritized in the algorithm. Like you can get buried for other reasons too, but that's a pretty reliable way to start getting buried. I more watch the algorithm for what's not doing well than what is doing well. So if something like the review material, I think it kind of started with like the commissioned reviews that I get because a lot of that is very oddball stuff. I'm like, that's not going to perform well, but I'm going to talk about it. Somebody paid me to. That moved over there. And then eventually, I think one of the last reviews I put up on here was of the newer Mortal Kombat movie, which was brand new at the time, and it just did not perform well at all. I'm like, this shouldn't be on the main channel. That's the point when I moved pretty much all review content over there. And there are other things that I would have done more of had they performed better. MCU Body Count is the big one for that. I launched into that project intending to do 6, and then evaluating whether or not it was worth doing more. I did 3 and stopped because of how well they were performing versus how much work they were was just not worth it. Similarly with when I took one final crack at doing 90s Comics Retrial, which I did enjoy doing, but also, did not perform well enough for how much work it was. And as I said, overall, I have a pretty good sense of what the algorithm likes from me. I also know what the algorithm doesn't like from me. But sometimes I'll still put stuff that I know the algorithm doesn't really want from me on this channel just because I want to put enough polish on it that it has no business being on the Break Room. So that would be stuff like the video I made about the mobile game Marvel Puzzle Quest or the Diablo franchise, or the video that I made about the family in Summer Wars, which is an anime film. Like, these are things I've wanted to talk about for a while, and I had enough thoughts. I'm like, this is a main channel video that I want to make on this topic. And like, I'll do that every, 3 to 6 months or so. Basically, I put these things up knowing that they will tank, and then like, okay, I need to not do anything like that for a while and then come back. So there are things that I do that algorithm hounds would tell you flat out I'm very foolish for doing, but they're the things that I do that keep me enjoying this job. So that's the trade-off I'm making. Like, if all I cared about was growth, I'd be doing a ton of stuff differently. But if I did it that way, I wouldn't like this job as much as I do. But as I alluded to earlier, I can't pay my bills with the AdSense revenue on YouTube alone. I've got other stuff going on, and so does pretty much everybody else.
I have, I guess if you're going to break it down that way, 4 different revenue streams. I have YouTube AdSense, the stuff I make off of videos, Patreon itself, which is my primary one. Most of my money comes from Patreon. The third one would be Nebula. I make, because I'm on Nebula as a platform, and I make money from watch time and views on Nebula as well. And then it's technically tangential to Nebula, but is also kind of a separate revenue stream. The fourth one is sponsors. So Nebula gets my sponsors for me and sort of runs that for me, but the sponsorships are a sort of separate revenue stream from Nebula itself. So those are the 4 major ones.
I guess I have 4. I've got Patreon, I've got YouTube AdSense, I've got 3 YouTube members. So that's a nice £6. And then there's sponsorships, which I kind of get every now and then.
I used to have merch that never did well, so I don't do that anymore. YouTube AdSense, Patreon, sponsorships, if that counts as one. I'm a part of Nebula, so if people sign up from my link, then or watch my videos, they've got like a revenue share, a rev split there. That's sort of akin to like YouTube Premium and how that works, I think. We don't have a Patreon for the podcast. The podcast has had ads and makes very little money to the point where we are in the process of making a Patreon for the podcast because Tristan and I cannot. It takes so much time to do that podcast that it takes away from our actual jobs that make more money. So we have to make it count. So I think that's everything.
I have access to a few, I do have plenty of offers for sponsorships, but I don't normally take them. I've taken, I think, 2 in my entire time. I've done the same with, I've done 1 line of merch ever. I did a run of plushies, which was fun, and I might do again at some point in the future. And then there's, there's plenty more. I've got Patreon. I had a YouTube memberships thing for a while, although I turned that off because I offered exclusive benefits that while I'm on a break at the moment, I don't want to keep doing those. So I turned off the YouTube memberships on my channel. And I have a Bandcamp now, which also technically produces income for me, although I haven't put much on it. So it hasn't been the most profitable thing as of yet.
When I was doing YouTube full time, it was mainly AdSense, Patreon, and sponsorships.
I've got the YouTube itself, which is obviously the main channel, Pup YouTube. Along the side that, I've got the Sunset City podcast, which is its own separate revenue stream. It makes most of its money through super chats, thanks to the audience, but it does also make ad revenue as a separate channel. I've also got my Patreon pages, both for my own channel and for the Sunset City podcast. And then, on top of that, I've got the editing commissions that I take on for different YouTubers, or different clients anyways. And I think that is actually the lot in terms of different revenue streams.
Let's see if I can remember all these. Okay. There's YouTube itself, which we'll call AdSense, because that's the sub-program app thing YouTube has you work through to get your payment. And that's from the ads that are run. So these aren't sponsorships, but these are the ads that are run on your channel. Before the video, mid-rolls, etc. So there's AdSense, there's Patreon, there's sponsorships occasionally. That's a rarity, but it does sometimes happen. There is residuals from my book. I also have a merch store, which I consider to be separate from that. And then there is OnlyFans, ManyVids, and Fansly, which are things that you will not find links for down in the description because those are orientated to a very, very different audience than what I do here. However, I'm mentioning them because they're not insignificant. That these are all part of the flow. Oh, Twitch. There's one. There's always something that I'm like, there's something that's like very rarely I get money from. Yeah, no, Twitch every now and then pays out as well. I think that's everything. Oh, I also get booked for burlesque gigs because I host and perform burlesque. So while that is not YouTube related, that is a revenue stream for me. So I think that's everything. Of course, just knowing what the revenue streams are is a bit incomplete. I think it's more helpful to know what are the ones that pay out the most, the top 3.
Probably it would go Patreon is 100% number 1. Number 2 would probably be AdSense. And then 3 sponsorships for Nebula. Patreon is definitely far and away the biggest. And then AdSense, like there's a big step down to AdSense. And then it's just a small gap between AdSense and sponsorships, but it's not as drastic as Patreon and AdSense, but it's still a decent, like it is a clear step down. And then Nebula is another clear step down as well from there, but again, not as drastic. So basically Patreon, AdSense, sponsorships, Nebula.
So AdSense is probably like maybe 90%. I'd have to check those numbers, but basically everything else on top of AdSense, it's not substantial enough to be anything other than like a bonus, or like, to sort of fill in gaps. Partially because sponsorships, for instance, I've not managed to figure out a way to get them to be reliable enough. Again, these numbers are probably not particularly accurate, but as far as it goes in my mind, AdSense is probably around 90%. Patreon is let's say AdSense is 85, Patreon is 7.5, so is sponsorships, and then the last 5% is YouTube membership. Let's call it 1%. I don't know. AdSense is the main thing. I'm sorry. I suppose you see now why I script all my videos, because I'm a very rambly talker.
On an average month, it would definitely be Patreon. Then if I make a video and it's sponsored, then would be sponsorships, and then YouTube. Typically, YouTube's pretty far down there these days. But if I don't make a video, then I don't get the sponsor that month. So then,
It's absolutely YouTube ads is the main thing by far, and then it goes sponsorships and merch deals. Those are the things that are lucrative. Then things like Patreon and that kind of thing. Viewer donations. That certainly that's a really it's a really nice bump of money, but it's not. It's not huge compared to the. It's not my main source of income, I guess. I wanted to find the right phrasing there to be like, no, it's not. It's not small. It's like a nice amount of money that I'm very happy to have, but it's not my most significant source of income. It's quite far behind things like sponsorships and ad revenue.
Patreon was the most consistent because it was just a regular amount each month that fluctuated, but it didn't fluctuate as much as like AdSense or sponsorships, because I only did a few of them.
So the central channel pup YouTube brings in generally the biggest percentage. And then I would say, depending on kind of the month and kind of the client needs, the commissions would be probably the second most reliable. And then probably Sunset City podcast after that. So those would be the top three. So number one being Channel Pup, the YouTube channel. Number two being the editing commissions, and number three being the Sunset City podcast. It's a gap that's closing a little bit right now because the YouTube is quite low and the commissions are quite good at the moment. But on a better month, it's a little different.
The top three revenue streams in order for me are Patreon, AdSense, aka YouTube ads, OnlyFans. And the gap between those first two and the third one is pretty big. However, what I pull in from OnlyFans is significant enough that, like, if I stopped doing it, that would be a hit. That if I stopped doing that and the other things in that vein that I do, that would be a hit to my finances. That would make life harder for me. But as for the other ones, it kind of varies year by year. I've been having a better year on YouTube itself than I've had in a little while as far as revenue goes. And part of that just has to do with the delays of things, because I got paid for December of last year, which was a really, really good month for me. Because I had a lot of really high-performing videos that month, partially because Doctor Who was back and also the James Somerton stuff happened. But that got paid for me in January, so technically that's stuff I'm making this year. But I think that December payment that came in January, I think that was one of only at most 2 times, it might even be the only time, I didn't check, but it's one of at most 2 times that I made more off of YouTube ads than I did off of Patreon since making this my full-time job. To clarify that, because back in the early launch days of the Patreon, yes, I was making more off YouTube, but since I've hit the fairly consistent level I've been at with Patreon for a while now, that has been the bigger and more reliable source of income. YouTube itself is much more variable. The main thing with Patreon is that it's a lot more stable. Like, it can go up, it can go down for various reasons, but usually within a pretty tight range. The range of YouTube income is ridiculous. Like, my most successful month on YouTube was triple my average month and probably quintuple a bad month. So, like, that's a lot. Whereas I think the most variance month to month I've had on Patreon is maybe doing mental math, maybe like 15%. So there's this big difference there. But though that is the ranking: Patreon, YouTube, OnlyFans. And pretty much everything under that kind of slushes together into a pile. Like I said, I rarely get sponsorships. And as far as, like, basically everything else lumped together is less than any of those top 3. But I do have a bunch of others, as I mentioned.
And now for the big question, the one I'd been building up to this whole time. Do professional YouTubers feel financially stable?
Not at all. Like, I am actually making a good amount of money, and I like enough to feel stable, and I can pay my rent. But what makes me nervous is the amount that fluctuates between, like, Patreon's going up and down based on, you know, everyone's finances, AdSense never being consistent at all. But I am lucky that the bar of which it stays at is well above where I'm able to pay my bills and everything and live fairly comfortably. But the fact that it fluctuates so much does always give me anxiety. That also might be my own mental thing and living under capitalism.
I'm not in any imminent risk of being homeless. I've got enough saved that, like, things could go badly for like a few months, maybe half a year, and then I'd have to find some sort of emergency part-time job or something in real life. That's probably a good position compared to a lot of people, but, like, basically I'm always I think the way I view it is I'm maybe 3 or 4 consistently bad months away from having to sort of shutter this as a full-time thing.
Not at all. We definitely had some. I got married last year, and, like, that was a very big expense, and we got a house, and that was a very big expense, and I am not the one shouldering most of that expense. It is my lovely wife who has an actual day job, and I am here to contribute as much as I can, but it is not nearly as much. Yeah, I wish it was better. It was better years ago, but, you know, what can you do? Everything changes.
I feel fairly financially secure. I mean, I feel financially secure enough that I am taking a pretty long break, and I'm not sure when I'm going to stop taking that break, and I don't feel that I need to be sure when I'm going to stop taking that break.
It wasn't the reason why I ultimately left, but I feel like the snowball of me, like, getting more and more burnt out with it was just the fact that it wasn't financially working out. And when I was, like, in the last, like, year of Dream Sounds, I was working like 7 days a week. I was doing, like, I mean, in the last, like, 10 months or so, I was doing, like, 10-hour days at least, like 7 days a week, consistently putting out videos, trying as many different things as I could to kind of, I don't know, just make it work. And that wasn't the reason why I stopped doing it. Ultimately, I think that did contribute to me just feeling like, okay, this is not really working out. What should I do with it? And then I realized, like, oh, I'm also just, like, personally done with this. Like, it wasn't, I didn't stop it because of money. I stopped it because it was just a lot of things that contributed to like, oh, I'm not really satisfied with what I'm doing right now with like my life. And so yeah, but so insecure because I felt like I was working so much. I didn't really see my friends. I didn't really do much. It helped because I mean, the fact that I was transitioning during all of this kind of helped because I was like not really motivated and going outside anyway, which was horrible in retrospect. But I think once I started feeling more comfortable, it was like, wait, where's my social life? So yeah, insecure.
Oh, not at all. Not at all financially secure. Like, because again, like I am quite reliant on clients, and I don't necessarily know if they're going to need work done or if they're even going to be able to afford work done, because sometimes they've got their own YouTube problems. Like they might make enough through YouTube to kind of get by, but they might not necessarily make enough to hire my editing. So I can't necessarily say for sure. As it is, I can make ends meet, but there's a lot of kind of improvisation. I think that's something people do need to understand before taking YouTube as kind of like a career or anything like that. Is that there's a lot of different like holes in the ship that will start bursting water, and you have to be prepared to put a lot of different hands over those holes in very quick succession, if that makes any sense.
I'll tell you what, I feel more financially secure now than I did towards the end of the office job, but that is because I'll try and keep this rant to a minimum. The office job that I was laid off from, it was a sales position. And for the first 6 years, I actually made pretty good money doing that. I actually think I made better money doing that than what I'm doing right now, even in my best year doing this. But after 6 years, as they were preparing for new ownership and then sold the company, and the 3 years that followed, because I was there for 9 years altogether, every year they restructured my commission. Now, as a salesperson, I had a base salary, which I got paid every month or every 2 weeks. I think it was every 2 weeks. I got paid my base salary as a regular paycheck. That didn't change. And technically, I got a raise. It was pathetic raise, but technically I got a raise every year. But my commission had been the same for the first 6 years. Then they started messing with it. And the first year that they messed with it, I made $15,000 less than I made the year before. The next year, I made about $4,000 less the year before. The year they laid me off, they'd restructured it again a third time in a way that it would have been possible for them to not pay me any commission for that year at all. I am not annoyed that they laid me off. I'm really glad for it, to be honest. So I feel more financially secure now than I did by the time I was laid off from that company. But if I were to go back to before they started messing with me, I was more financially secure then than I am now. Basically, for me, my bills are paid, and reminder, I have fewer bills than is typical for a person my age. So my bills are covered. And also keep in mind, I do also have some more expenses than some people might have because I have a kid. So, there is that as well. But my bills are covered. I'm not at danger of missing a payment, being late on bills or anything like that. I don't have a lot of money for much else after that. I have my bills covered. I can feed my kid. I can feed myself. I can maintain the car. I can put enough gas in the car to see any number of my various partners that I have. But that's kind of it. People will ask me about going to things like Gallifrey 1, which is Doctor Who convention in Los Angeles, which I love. And I've been going to every other year. I went in 2020. This was right before the lockdown. I went in 2022. I went earlier this year, 2024. And people are like, well, why don't you go every year? I'm like, I can't afford it. I can't. And like, that is a high expense, to be honest, but it kind of, it epitomizes that I have to keep things tight. I'm not at danger of not covering my base bills. I don't have a lot else to play with. And that's part of why, like, if you watch me on Twitch, I play a lot of old games, a lot of indie games. Well, partly because that's what appeals to me anyway, but also that is cheaper in the first place and more likely to go on sale, so that I'm only paying $10 for a $20 game, because that's the kind of budgeting I have to do. I feel, as far as being a YouTuber goes, probably more financially secure than most. But I still don't love being dependent on that site. In an ideal world, 2 of those revenue streams would on their own cover my bills. Like, the ideal situation financially for me would be that both, if it was all I had, Patreon covers all my bills, YouTube covers all my bills. And so I know even if one goes wonky, if the company goes under, if I get booted off the platform, which I do not anticipate, I don't think there's any reason for that to happen. But like, I don't like the idea that if I lose one of those streams, I'm in big trouble. I don't like that. So that's a certain lack of security. And also it's worth noting that like, I don't have a lot to put into a savings. The idea of being able to retire, which again, millennials retiring. So financial security right now, decent. Looking ahead to the future, like, will I ever be able to retire or even dial back the amount of work I do? I don't know. Like, a lot of the YouTubers I really love will start out earlier doing the kind of pace that I do, weekly videos or something like that. And it's pretty common for, as they grow, for them to bump down to, well, I'll put something out every 2 weeks or maybe even once a month. Some even less than that. Some it's just, I'll put one out when it's done. And they have the backing and the support through Patreon, through YouTube, through whatever it might be, to be able to do that, to cut back on how quickly they have to crank stuff out. I don't. I'd like to be able to do that. For both being able to put a little bit more into each video, but in addition also like give myself a little more breathing room for coming up with ideas I really like. I would love to cut back. I can't afford to do that though. I can't afford to not have a new video out every week on this platform. I literally can't afford to do that. So I think that's where I'm in a weird liminal space as far as financial security goes. Like, I feel pretty stable, but ultimately, I'm also kind of trapped in a way with the way things currently are, unless something happens where I get a big boost, where I can afford to either do stuff less often or keep the same pace but outsource something like the editing. Like, I think that's kind of the dream for me right now, be able to hire an outside editor. I would love to offload the editing to somebody else. I can't afford it. The only thing that I outsource that is an expense is the thumbnails. My thumbnail guy Joel is phenomenal. And I do have help besides that. I have Carolyn, who helps me out a lot behind the scenes, and there's obviously the mods and whatnot, but like, those folks also aren't paid. Some of them maybe should be if I could afford to, but I can't.
I mean, the only other thing to just add is just, that thing I kind of touched upon at the end there, which is the fluctuation of it. That is the most nerve-wracking thing, I think, for any creator in this space, of just how much that can fluctuate for numerous different reasons, be it if you're chasing the algorithm enough, the fact that even if you are doing algorithm chasing stuff, whatever, the fact that like Patreon can fluctuate. Like, the biggest fluctuations I see on my Patreon are just generally like the economy right now, because like a lot of people have to leave Patreon because they have their own financial stuff that they're dealing with, whether they lose their jobs or something like that. So you're sort of at the whims of everyone else's financial situation as well. You know, same thing with Nebula and sponsorships. You know, what comes your way comes your way. So I think that that's just the biggest thing, is that, again, while I am very personally lucky that I am at a place where, you know, even the lowest amount that I make, I feel fairly secure, again, thanks mostly to my patrons. It is very anxiety inducing, the amount of fluctuation that you get within that, and not really knowing exactly how much security you have financially in terms of like month to month. So
one thing I will say, and you can put this in or you can take it out depending on how well I phrase it, because I'm not even sure what I'm going to say yet. There's a tension that is becoming more and more apparent as, I guess, as some of the ad money dries up in this space. You know, sponsors are becoming a bit more sort of timid. Maybe, you know, in certain regions, AdSense payments are going down in response to, like, you know, worldwide financial conditions or whatever over the past year or two. I think something that's going to become more and more clear is there's a lot of people that engage with content. Well, I don't want to call it content, videos on this platform. I feel like don't always appreciate how much work goes into them. You know, I feel like we're very much mentally still on an internet where we kind of take the infinite variety and quality of stuff like this for granted.
Something that I'm trying to do better is learning when I need to ask for help from people. And that is so hard, because I'm sure you know, and I'm sure anyone who is any sort of, you know, content creator, influencer, what have you, knows, people will see numbers. Like, they'll see my channel and be like, you have over 500,000 subscribers. You should be making tons of money. And it's like, it's not that simple, and it's complicated. And so I always fear that just by me even asking for, like, hey, I could use more Patreon support this month, or I could use just whatever, because, you know, I'm sort of, I don't know, I want to not have to rush videos out. I like being able to take my time, but I can't, because then I don't, you know, get sponsorships and things like that. I'm just like, it's hard for me to ask for help, because I feel like someone's going to come back at me and be like, what are you talking about? You're being greedy. You make probably tens of thousands of dollars a month. And I'm like, I wish. I don't think I've ever made that much money on doing YouTube stuff. So yeah, I don't know. It's a sort of complicated thing of, like, I want to ask for help. I need to be better about that, but I'm just so scared of how that looks to people who think that I have so much money, you know, that I'm like being greedy or something. I don't think it's too much to I think everyone knows about James Somerton at this point. And he had a big thing about just spending money on just gear, and just like being like, I'm gonna get your money and just buy like expensive stuff that I'm not gonna use for the things that I promised for. And like, I feel extremely, because of like, but partly because of that, I do feel like extremely guilty about like, oh, I have a good camera, and like I have a good microphone, and like I have fun lighting. Is that, should I not, I feel bad about having all of that. Should I, and I'm at a point right now where I'm like, don't feel very financially stable. Like, is it wrong for me to ask for more help, or should I just be like, all right, time to just go back to, you know, more simple setup, and just like, you know, film, you know, sell my gear and things like that. So I don't know. That's just sort of something that I also have been thinking about. And it's just very complicated. I don't know. This is like a therapy session.
The one way that I do modify my content to try and make it more monetarily profitable is to try and appease the, you know, the monetization fairies. I do try to avoid certain words and certain topics if I can, to allow myself to actually make more money off of a project. But it's not my hard line, you know. If I feel that that saying a certain thing or broaching a certain topic is extremely important for the project I'm working on, or even just, you know, relatively important, then I will do it. But ultimately, yeah, there are occasions where I've cut out a joke because it's like too much, or, you know, whatever. And it's not a huge thing. I do tend to skirt the line more than I know that a lot of people will censor all swearing or will avoid any like sexual topic or mentions of violence or anything like that. And I do play pretty loosely with it, but there are, you know, YouTube's guidelines tend to, and I'm sure you are aware, discourage you from using any extremely strong language in the first like 30 seconds of a video. And I do tend to stick fairly closely to that unless I have a particularly good reason not to.
I think I had an experience with YouTube that I think a lot of channels have, where there's like a lot of growth, or at least like financial prosperity. Also, yeah, I'm not going to say exact numbers, but like the amount of money I was making from YouTube is not that much ultimately, but that's also because I live my life in a way that allows me to do art full time, which also requires, I don't know, not living with a lot of expenses. I also live in Berlin, Germany, where my expenses are about like a third of what like my friends in New York City have for expenses, or like even less than that. So it's like I was able to make it work, and with what for me contextually financially was like a huge growth, just like a lot of money that for me at the time that helped me like keep going for a bit. It I think I had what a lot of channels do, where it's like it's hard to kind of figure out what engages the algorithm. And so I had a few videos that did really well, and I was like, okay, that's great. Like that's good money. Let me just wait and see if things continue to go well. And then they continued to go well. There were like 2 or 3 more like big bursts where like the algorithm caught onto a video, and I was able to like sustain myself for like 2 to 3 months afterwards because of that, combined with Patreon and sponsorships. But YouTube is kind of like a slot machine, or at least AdSense is. And so I kind of thought if I applied myself and tried to engage it by, I mean, continuing to talk about things that I think are enjoyable, but also just look at it from like a very analytical standpoint, I would be able to crack it. And I think I just wasn't able to crack it. And that's totally fine. But that's something that I think a lot of channels go through, I've since learned. And even though I thought I was doing the responsible thing by like waiting a certain amount of time to see if I could understand it better, I think ultimately it's something that is really unreliable. So like, or at least AdSense and like the algorithm and stuff. So developing like a community and like support outside of that, with like Patreon stuff, I feel like is really important. And now I'm kind of just back to what I was doing before. I went full time with YouTube, which is that I'm a musician. So I work freelance in just like a bunch of different things. And I have my hands in a lot of different things that all contribute to what I'm doing. But yeah, I have no intent on going full time again. I think now that I understand how it works for me, or like how it could work for me, I'm more focused on just incorporating that into my life instead of structuring my life around that, because it was really unhealthy. Yeah, so
I guess I'd like to shed maybe a bit more of a positive light on it, because as it is, the conversation when it comes to YouTube and income can very easily become quite negative, I guess, because it's not a consistent income, and there's a lot of improvisation. There's a lot of making things up as you go. There's a lot of having to very much plan things almost instantaneously based on the results that you're getting throughout the month. But I will say this: for the little money you do get out of YouTube, or the little money that I get out of YouTube, it is a good way to make money. Like just being able to talk about the things that I love is something that comes naturally to me. So to be able to make money from doing that, it's definitely something that feels good. It's like that little bit of money that I make from that feels like it's worth more than the more stable money that I might make through, I don't know, sweeping up a floor at McDonald's like I used to. At the same time, survival is something to always take into account when you're plotting, living a little dream like this or something along those lines. So, you want to be sensible. There's, keep on dreaming, but also stay a little grounded too, I guess. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. And also be aware that YouTube is like a big ocean of a lot of different little fishies making all their content. There are sharks in that ocean. There are people that are going to try and hack your channel. There are people that are going to try and dig up any piece of dirt on you that they can possibly find or misconstrue anything they possibly can to make you appear bad and weaponize your audience. Like, the thing that keeps you going can very easily become your downfall. So beware of the sharks is what I guess I'm saying there. But anyone should give it a try and have fun. Just be prepared for, the fact that us YouTubers are not all Mr. Beast. We're not all millionaires. We're not all making a ton of money just because we've got over 1,000 subscribers. We are vulnerable to, cyber attacks and people trying to tarnish our reputation. And if you don't play your cards right, it can be a very costly endeavor. So it's one of those things where you got to be built for it. You got to be ready to learn on the job. And while you got to be receptive to criticism, you've also got to try not to let it get under your skin either. So it's a fun venture. It's a job like any other. It has its ups, it has its downs. But on a whole, I feel lucky that I am able to do this.
So I think what was sort of most interesting about this to me is finding out the variations in how people make this work. Because one of the reasons I wanted to talk to other people was looking at the Patreon backing numbers of some YouTubers who are bigger than me. Like, both in terms of they have individual videos that have done way better than anything I've done, and their overall channel is bigger, but my Patreon's bigger. And I don't want to necessarily speculate on why that is. I think there's probably any number of reasons why that is. I mean, part of it is, honestly, I got a big sympathy bump when I got laid off. And I think a single event being like a reason to rally support as opposed to just a general, hey, things are hard. Because, I mean, when aren't they? That's probably part of it. That discrepancy and wanting to hear from other people, I think, was important, because while I can tell you all day long about my experience of making a living on this platform, my experience is not definitive. And also, like, I would have loved to have gotten more people. I would have loved to have gotten also a more varied group. This has come up with some of the other videos where I've had interviews of people. There's been a video like that before on this channel, talking to YouTubers who came out as trans, as well as a video I did over on the Vera Wild channel, talk about people who make OnlyFans content. Some people had some criticisms about not having as diverse a group as I could have. Trust me, I'm aware. I reached out to as diverse a group as I could find good contact info for, who I thought might be willing to speak to me. And even like shot the moon on a few people, like they'd have no reason to speak to me. Well, I'll ask. But ultimately I can only present to you the group that got back to me and said yes. And I don't want it to sound like everyone else rejected me. Like, I probably got caught in spam filters or who knows. But like, I can only work with who said yes. So if you think this should have been a more diverse group in terms of race or age or subject matter that they talk about, I agree. But I got the group that I got. So I am not a big name. I don't have pull. But in any case, thank you to everybody who spoke with me. And I hope that you folks found this interesting, because I feel like this could potentially be a resource. A look at the ways that trying to make this work looks like. Because there is no one way to do it. But there are some recurrent patterns and general rules of thumb that you might find along the way. And while I'm certainly not going to start offering, here's the tips and tricks to do it successfully, because I don't feel qualified to do that, I can tell you how I do it, and I could give you a glimpse into how some other folks do it.
I hope you found this interesting, insightful, helpful, something full. Am I just full of it? I don't know. Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills. I've mentioned it a few times, but it is something that I could not do this without. And any amount that you offer help there is of great assistance. But even if you can't do that, links to other things I do down in the description, except for the spicy stuff. You can search elsewhere for that. But like, share, subscribe. They also help. What I really want you to remember, though, you are beautiful. You are valid. You are loved. You are the council, and I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Now to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Bernabi Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toka Blahuvian, Pal Barabajoggle, and Mara G. Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name said, maybe even correctly, in the Patreon support tiers. Also, it helps me feed these little buggers.